Welcome to study. Come on over, join us if you haven't yet. I'm going to continue my conversation. That's what I want to do. You're probably welcome to sit by Jen. The camera's up here. We'll say it was somebody else. They wouldn't expect you to be down here, so you're good. We'll say Jennifer said it, whatever. Am I live? Yeah. Okay. It's okay. Nobody watches this at all. Like 0 people. Used to be 1, and now he's stopped too. So it's fine. Yeah, wants to monitor my theology. So that's about the only reason for it. Okay, we are going to get started here. This was scheduled to be a special Sunday seminar, and it is still a special Sunday seminar. We're still going to have that topic, but we didn't split up for a couple of reasons. One, because I didn't find anyone who agreed to come teach this class. When I said we were talking about conflict among other people in the church and in our families, everybody just backed away. They were like, no, I don't want to touch that one. No, that's actually probably not fair. I didn't ask very soon, and Pastor Moser normally writes the material for this class, and he's been less available to create curriculum in the last few weeks with his family struggles. And they had decided up in Springfield to only have the family class, and the other classes were just going to meet normal. So I said, well, we will just meet all for one class down here. I do anticipate that this fall we'll have one more Sunday seminar when it's scheduled, and for that one we will split up into parents with children at home down in the music room and separated out here. I know that's kind of been, at least for those of us that have met down there, it's been a nice time for us to get to know each other a little bit better and enjoy that time in fellowship together. But the other reason that this is good is that this really is a topic that we have to address in a specific way, maybe as we teach our children, but it is something that we all really need to learn and talk together about, and maybe something that we parents can learn something about from even older generations or those who don't anymore have children at home. So thank you all for being here today. You only have one piece of paper for now. I'm going to give you more, but does anybody need one of these warm-up papers themselves? I've got more copies if anybody doesn't have one. That's kind of where we're going to start. Today we're going to talk about specifically really for all of these sessions all year, we're talking about how we love our neighbors. We spend a lot of time talking about outreach, right? You think about loving your neighbors. Okay, we want to love people outside of the church. That's certainly important. But sometimes we forget as Christians that the first mission field that God places us in is to interact with our own neighbors who are maybe inside of our households or family, inside of the church, as well as inside of our own households, our individual families. God does have a lot to say about how we speak and interact with our families, and yet the relationships that we cherish the most often become the most marred by conflict. Have you noticed that? The people that you love the most, or the people that you disagree with the most, or hurt you the most, maybe, right? You hurt the most the ones you love the most. That's to state the bad thing first, right? Yeah. So certainly in our close relationships, the people that you interact with more, right, are the people that you end up having more conflict with. Also, I think we notice that as you maybe look around on Sunday mornings, I think we sometimes assume not just that other families, but other people, right, who are sitting in the pews, they must have it more together than I do. Maybe you've had that thought before. Maybe you know that thought's not true, but it certainly seems to be true, right? Oh man, I know all the problems I have, and these other beautiful people come here smiling on Sunday mornings, and it seems like they've got it all together. Why can't I have it all together too? But we know that the reality is that conflict is universal. Every single family, every single person throughout time, even Jesus' earthly family, as we heard in the reading today, right? Dealt with trying to figure out how to love and communicate through and in the midst of conflict. So, before we dive into our current families and our current relationships and situations of conflict, we want to take a look back on where we learn to communicate in the middle of conflict in the first place. So, if you're comfortable, you maybe have seen the question sitting in front of you. Share with the people sitting around you how anger was communicated to you when you were growing up. If you are uncomfortable sharing about your own experience, consider discussing ways you commonly see adults communicate their anger. So the warm-up question said, how did the influential adults in your life, parents, teachers, relatives, coaches, communicate their anger with you when you were growing up? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to talk a little bit about that question, maybe what you've thought about already in your tables, and then we'll come back as a big group. So go ahead and talk about those things with the people around you. So that's also why it's helpful to be at a table with people.
They were never really angry. So it was either like passive communication, like I know they're not happy, or like if I was over the line, it was like over the line. It's like run for the hills.
Like she didn't know what to use for
You want to do it?
And like that's good in some ways, but in other ways, yeah. I don't know. I think I know the studies we all think how we can do it. Especially to I was thinking that's going to be the next caveat on here. Just because I'm the guy leading this classroom doesn't mean I'm actually the best at this stuff. Yeah. No. Yeah. I think that's
Really since like since we went from 2 to 3, we find ourselves saying that we need to yell at
yeah.
but then actually doing that, but like, because we'll be like, all right, tomorrow it's going to be happening. And then 15 minutes
I get it. Okay, lots to talk about there. I'm going to start reining you back in. Anybody feel comfortable sharing maybe some insights you gained about the way anger or conflict was dealt with in your own families growing up, or maybe by coaches or other mentors or teachers or just adults in general in your life? Anything anybody kind of has a takeaway from their table? I don't have time to go to every table, but yeah?
Well, about 13 years old, I came home late, really late.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't call them or nothing, I just came home late. As soon as I walked through the door, my mom comes up to me, plastic ruler.
Plastic ruler.
She laid it into me.
Yeah.
She really laid it into me.
Yeah, but you understood that that was not to happen.
He said, go to your room, stay in your room until we tell you to come out.
Yeah, go to your room and stay there until we tell you to come out. Anybody else have anything that was a takeaway? Yeah?
The three oldest of our family were boys, and the belt hung behind the kitchen door. They never buckle on it, and Dad would fold that in half and use it on us.
Fold it in half, fold the belt in half. Is
It
the,
made more noise, I'm sure.
I was gonna say, is the folding in half just for sound effect or like, did it make it hurt worse? I don't know, I wouldn't, oh. So you knew where the belt hung, so if Dad headed to the door, you knew you were in trouble. Yeah, so those are some physical, right? Some physical examples of anger being taken out. Any other ways that anger was taken out sometimes in the home? Yeah.
I feel like my parents in my younger years didn't always have like the best verbal communication. It was more just like loud talking.
Loud.
You know what I mean? Like, rah! And
Right.
it never created good resolution. I mean, it just created higher escalation.
Just more escalation of the
and
situation.
frustration of
Yeah.
problems, and then still never seeing eye to eye, so it wasn't effective communication. So I think for me, actually early on, even in my teenage years, I was just like, this does not make sense to me. And so I always took it more like, let's talk through things. You don't
Right.
have to have a raised voice, like let's,
Right.
let's very like calmly address like our differences. And so like Daniel and I always, even if we have a difference of opinion now, we talk about it. And there are times Mia sees that we don't always agree. But it's like we want her to understand, like you don't have, like we're different people. We're not going to approach things the same
Right.
way, think the same way. So
Yeah.
it's just the approach to difference.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
open communication and better dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, I think each of us in our own way experienced, some level of conflict and not always dealing with that conflict well. We're humans and we're sinful and we don't always deal with it well.
It was a little the opposite of that in my house. It didn't get loud, it got really quiet because it was like, we're just not going to talk about it. I don't know that it was intentionally like take time to cool down, but it was just like, I'm so mad that I can't even talk to you right now. And so it was just like, get like eerily quiet.
She's not lying. I've seen it happen like all of a sudden, like, which my family was loud too. I mean, when things got intense, it got louder, although my family's just loud in general. But so it was so weird when I was first around her and I'm like, wait, what is going on? They're like, oh, everybody's mad at each other. I'm like, this is not what being mad at each other looks like, but for them it was. And then, yeah. So, I kind of notice a few things as we kind of talk through this stuff. I notice we have a tendency towards either fight or flight, right? Either it gets loud or it gets even physical or it gets just completely like we're just going to completely back off and not talk to each other. And sometimes that goes to the extreme. It hasn't in her family, so don't take this the wrong way. But sometimes that goes to the extreme of then families just completely not talking to each other at all over the course of years and decades even, right? And so this can and sometimes the yelling and screaming, right? The escalation goes to the extent where there's hatred and just outright abuse and terrible things happening, even in families that do continue to talk to each other. And so either way, whether it's a fight or a flight reaction, these are sinful human reactions to conflict, and we don't always deal that well with it. The other takeaway that I was kind of noticing is because we're able to be in a mixed generational room here, I think those of us that are, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong if you're a little younger in this room, I think you're less likely to have experienced actual physical, maybe beatings, right, from your parents if you are below a certain age. Now, I'm not going to name what that age is. I don't know. But I think in general, the attitude towards discipline of children used to be, it's fine if we need to get out the ruler sometimes. It's fine to get out the switch. It's fine even to get out the belt because it gives an impression and it communicates that this is wrong, right? I mean, tell me if you think I'm completely crazy on that. I think the younger you are, maybe if you're closer to my age, you're less likely. My parents spanked me some, right? But it was not, I don't know that I ever got, there was no belt, there was no ruler, right? And parents now, I think, who experience some of those, beatings maybe, were less likely to do that physical sort of aggression towards their children. But I noticed that the sin is still there of becoming angry and sort of disciplining too harshly. It just comes out in different ways. Maybe it's through the loud words. Maybe it's through the anger expressed in that way. Maybe it's even through passive aggressive behaviors or manipulation of trying to get their children to behave in certain ways and control them without them even realizing it, which then ends up doing kind of psychological damage. The point is, it continues through the generations, even as sort of the ultimate way of addressing that conflict changes over time. So yes, we all have experienced this, and I guess the takeaway really is that if you experienced anger in the relationships in your life, you're not alone, right? Probably everyone in this room, to varying extents, has experienced that, even in their own families, right? So just be aware of that as we continue to talk together. The other people sitting out there who seem to have their lives all together are not perfect either. We all struggle with how to deal with anger and conflict in our lives. Why do you think it may be important to evaluate how influential adults in our lives dealt with conflict when you were growing up, now that you are an adult? Why is this an important thing to kind of think about?
Pastor, I think
Yeah.
some people go one way or the other.
Uh-huh.
They grew up with violence and a lot of anger and all of that. Then they do the same thing with their children because it's all they know.
Right.
And the flip side of that is, I would never ever do that because that's what my parents did.
Right.
And maybe sometimes they go the other way, they go.
Don't do anything at all and no discipline even. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
either way, it's
Yeah.
how you were influenced.
So either way, we need to learn something about maybe the best way to deal with some of these things as adults. Any other thoughts about why it's important to maybe reflect on where you grew up and how you grew up in thinking about things maybe now as how you treat others in your own house, how you're raising and parenting your kids, as well as just how you treat other adults in your lives, how you treat other people, right? We have a tendency to mirror or maybe react the opposite way from based on how we are raised, right? And the influences we've seen. The point of today is really not to send you away feeling inadequate as parents or as just people in life as you deal with your anger and frustration towards other adults in your life. The point of today is to kind of pause and intentionally consider what Scripture says about the way we communicate in the midst of conflict. For better or for worse, we all learn about communication from the influential adults in our personal history. While it isn't helpful to harbor unresolved hurt over our past, if we feel like communicating anger or disappointment wasn't a strength of the people around us growing up, it's important to consider how this has impacted how we interact in our own families and relationships today. We're not going to spend any more time reflecting on our own childhoods, but as you use today as a starting point to evaluate maybe communication in your own homes and lives, as we try to pause and reflect ourselves why we communicate our emotions the way we do. Doing this can help us to embrace healthy patterns as we learn and disrupt unhelpful patterns we would like to leave in the past. So again, it's just the starting point of conversation. That's kind of the way all of these Fifth Sunday seminars, these Sunday seminars have been designed, is to, I just want to start a conversation about this topic in your own home, because how you address it is going to be different than how somebody else does. I would also just kind of as a caveat to this whole presentation, I'm the one standing up front. That doesn't mean that I'm better at this than anybody else in the room, right? Just because I'm trying to start this discussion and have this conversation, I struggle with this too. How do we communicate well in our relationships in a God-pleasing way, even when conflict is there, even when my kids are not? I was just sharing here at this table, with Joe and Danielle about, how I have lots of thoughts and conversations, and I have to say I'm sorry to my children a lot over sometimes the way that I communicate and speak to them. So just as a caveat, know that pastor's not perfect either, and just because I'm the one standing up here leading this discussion doesn't make me any better at these things. In fact, I would say at times this is something that I still very much struggle with in controlling emotions and speaking in God-pleasing ways, especially in my close relationships. So, we're going to do a little, very, very simple assessment of conflict in your own household life or family. And again, this is just a very simple exercise. And I would encourage you, if you are with your spouse or people who live in your household, I would encourage you to just take one of these and fill it out even together. And talk through it. If you're here on your own, that's okay too. You can think about your own relationships and life. Have somebody to help you capture. So, pass those out. When this sheet comes to you, you will see that there are simply 2 circles on it that you can fill out. And again, this is meant to just be a springboard for additional conversation with the people in your life who you're able to kind of ponder these things with. I know it becomes a little bit hard if you completely live on your own, but maybe just a personal reflection time. Topics that lead to light conflict with my family, and again, it uses the word family. You can define who your family is, right? Sometimes your family are just your really close friends who you're seeing on a regular basis. Sometimes it is your household, whoever lives in your immediate household. Sometimes it's your children, even if they don't live at home, right? And conflict with them. And then topics that lead to heavy conflict with my family. So what are the things that we don't want to bring up, right? It's not always religion and politics that are the taboo conversations whenever you gather with family or friends, right? It's sometimes other hot button issues that you know are going to lead to conflict. Now, if you want to hide it from the other people around you so nobody knows what those hot button things are, that's fine. This is not being turned back into me. This is not going to be graded. Okay? So it's just meant as a place of conversation. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to kind of fill that out. What are places and things that lead to conflict? Light conflict and heavy conflict. You want me to come talk to you about this? Probably. We're supposed to. That is what I said. I was trying to get ready to. Yeah, that's over there. That's true. My childhood principal. It is very much at home. I know. Every teacher is always like, "Oh, your kid's just so perfect. I wish I had." I'm like, "Great. I'm glad they're doing so good for you." But yeah, I know. I'm like, they get home and it's just blah. I know. Okay. I'm going to pull you back in. Hopefully you had some time to just begin a very brief thought about these are things that add to more conflict. We all have different backgrounds, right? Everybody's got a different story. Those items on each of your sheets are probably all going to be very different. Anybody have any key topics of discussion that really bring up a lot of conflict? Just for the sake of, not so that we can judge you, but so that we can all identify with, yes, that's a big challenge. Yeah? Yeah? Money and time. So how time is spent. And how you can't have both. Yeah. My 8th grade teacher, who I consider to be a very wise woman, one time said, time, money, and energy. Those are the 3 kind of resources that you can, and to have more of one, you have to spend more of another. And how you, and which of those things you decide to spend time and energy on can be a point of great conflict, right? So limited resources, right? Limited resources.
It's economics. You can call it the economics of the home.
The economics of the home.
The allocation of scarce resources.
The allocation of scarce resources. No, you're exactly right. Hashtag MBA Joe Nagel, right? The economics of the home. How do we deal with, the fact that there's scarcity of time and money, right? And different opinions about what is good uses of those things. Yeah? Very good. Yeah, what else?
Sandy and I got married 54 years ago. We decided I'd make all the big decisions. She'd make all the small decisions. In 54 years, we've never had a big decision.
I thought you were gonna say you've never had a small decision. It's all been you, just making all those decisions. Good for you. Good for you, Keith. Thanks be to God. Yeah, Tim.
I think for us, it's a big conflict have been around time because it's one thing you don't get any more of. And for the majority of our marriage, I made commitments without consulting anybody else.
She just silently smiles and nods.
Well, because it's true, and it would be, I committed to X, whether it was business or church or something outside of that. I made a commitment and didn't seek any counsel or get anybody else's consideration in that decision, and that was kind of right. Rightly so.
Yep. 42 years. Yeah.
So
thanks.
Grace.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, we do deal with these things in Christian ways and work through them, even if we never get to make a decision, or if we make decisions that aren't maybe the best at times about how we use this time.
And that gets worse as you get older. People think that once you're retired, you have a lot more time, and so it's not a big deal. But the older you get, time becomes more and more of a conflict.
Because I don't know, because I'm not in that stage of life. I wonder, does that have to do something with just realizing how time really is short? I mean, time is
It's because you give so much more.
Yeah.
You give more time to the church. People ask you, hey, do you have time to do this? Yeah, sure. And people ask you, hey, we're going to do this.
Sure.
Do you have time to do this? Yeah, sure. And pretty soon you've given all your time.
Right.
And then
time is still always limited. It's still always limited, right? Yeah. And it's a good thing to have a full life and be, committed to so many things. And yet, it's still, we can't do everything always to everyone.
And as an old spinster, I get signed up for everything because people assume, well, you don't have kids, so you don't have a husband, you can do whatever. And it's very similar. Like pretty soon you find yourself completely maxed out.
Yep.
And that's hard too. But then you feel selfish because you don't want to back off, and then because I respect everybody else's family needs and I want them to have that time. Yep.
Time is always a point of contention. There's never enough of it. What about conflicts with children, especially kind of for those that have kids still at home? What breeds a loud house or a quiet house if you're the back off type people? Yeah. Food. Fighting over food. Like what type of food, or just meal times in general? Getting them to eat enough, eat the right things. Okay. What else? Jenny, you had something.
The
them fighting with, or how they treat one another.
Amen.
All the other things I can take to home with, but when they start treating each other poorly, then it really.
When they literally start beating each other,
Yes,
like
yes,
this happens like daily in our house. You all think my kids are perfect, right? Because they come here at church and they snuggle with me on Sunday morning as I'm leaving. They literally at home like beat each other, and we're like, no, we cannot hit other people. No, no. And then with words too, it's not always physical, right? And it's I don't know how to describe it other than it's just selfishness. Like it's so hard, and I think adults are the same way. We show it less sort of directly, right? But like their selfishness just comes out in droves. Like, I don't care that he wants this right now. I want it and I have it. So I'm not going to let them have it, and I'm going to keep it. And if they try to take it from me, I'm just going to snack it, right? Because I want this. There's no other reason than I want this now, right? Yeah. There are no innocent bystanders, right? In the kindergarten classroom, right? Everybody is at fault in some way, but it's so like we can at least grasp that as adults. We don't live it out very well, but we can at least grasp that I have some, like I try to tell this to my kids, if you're fighting with someone else, whether that's your brother or anybody, like there's something you've done too, because if there's conflict and fighting, yeah, like they come to tattle on us for what somebody else did. I said, well, what did you do? And that's always my first question. And they're like, well, no, they did this. I'm like, no. What did you do? And they're like, well, you always blame me. I'm like, no, I always blame whoever's coming and talking to me about this because you've done something. But, one of them comes to me and tells me what the other one's done. And I ask them, they're like, why do you always blame me? I'm like, when I'm talking to the other one, I always blame them. Like, you just feel like I'm always blaming you, right? But yeah, so it's just hard to wrap our mind around. It's hard for them to wrap their mind around why they can't have what they want when they want it. Which I think when we admit it to ourselves, that's hard for us as adults to wrap our minds around too. We've gotten better at hiding some of that selfishness. But Becky's been waiting a long time.
Okay, now that doesn't change. That's what kids leave.
Yeah.
I have all my grandchildren are all graduated, and they call and say, hey, Grandma, I need this. And then shortly after, Sarah says, Grandma, I'm going to stop by and I need you to do this for me. Well, Abby called and she needs me to sew this. Yeah, but I need this right now. I'm going to work and my pants ripped. I'm going to stop by and do this. And when you've got 6 of them and they all are going to stop by, and everybody wants one now.
Yeah, I want what I want when I want it, and it doesn't get better when we get older, does it?
It doesn't matter how old they are. So all I can say is I miss when they were at home and little. And I would not change a day. My kids are in their 40s and 50s, and my grandkids range from 18 to 32, and I wouldn't change that. So I would say to you, count the blessings, count the fights, count the whatever, and be very, very thankful for every request you get.
We're going to turn to Scripture, turn to Ephesians 4, verses 1 to 7. Sometimes because we deeply love our family, when we hear arguing, we immediately focus on the problem that we think is causing it, right? Especially, I think I'm especially guilty of this. We want to fix it, right? We're fixers. We try to fix the problem. And sometimes those problems do need an immediate solution, right? Like if someone's hitting or beating someone else into a pulp, we need to pull that person off and fix that problem because that's an issue. But a lot of times it really isn't the problem that needs to immediately be resolved. It's the way that we're communicating about the problem. This is kind of, I think, what Robin was getting at way earlier whenever she said, I want to, communicate things well and talk through what's happening rather than just escalating the conflict. So that's kind of the desire today. I can't fix every one of your problems. You can't fix every problem and conflict that's going to come up in your family. But we can work on learning how to communicate through and in the midst of those conflicts. It's the way we're communicating about the problem. Family conflict is unavoidable in our sinful world, but there are Christian ways to work through it. We're going to continue exploring that today. So Ephesians 4, 1-7. Does somebody have that and want to read it out? All 7 verses if you can.
As a prisoner for the Lord, then I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ portioned it. This is why it said, when he ascended on high, he led captives in his train and gave gifts to the men.
Very good. Very good. So the question here is, how do you think Paul's instructions to the early church continues to apply to us in our relationships today? He's speaking to the church specifically. How does it apply to us today?
Well, he's describing the manner in which you should communicate.
Yeah.
Humility, gentleness, patience, remembering that you love each other.
Yeah.
And so that should help de-escalate your vehemence over the subject.
Right, yeah. This can certainly still applies today in just the way we communicate with each other. Do you love your family? Yeah. So think about how we communicate with them. Completely humble and gentle, patient, bearing with one another in love, making every effort. He uses some pretty absolute words here. Every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. So if this should be true of all brothers and sisters in Christ, right? That's really what he's saying here to the church, right? This is how you should be treating everybody, especially in your relations here in the church at Ephesus. How much more then to those who God has called us into specific close relationships through family, through our households, should we be treating them in those same ways? Any other thoughts on that passage?
Gail does it with cookies. She brings across the street.
Gail does it with cookies she brings across the street. That's how she apologizes for conflict she's caused. Oh no, for conflict you caused. No. Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. Yeah, we want to see that we are brothers and sisters in Christ. The early church, like any family, right, had an abundance of conflict too. Gail, were you going to say something? Sorry. Okay.
For a while, I was a manager of a really small department, which I think is almost harder than a big one. And we would have conflict. And I would go home and I'd say, I don't know what to tell, and as women, I don't know what to tell these girls. And Paul said, well, and I think this might be where it came from. Tell them that when they talk to each other, what they say is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary?
Yeah.
And does it edify?
Yeah.
Or build up?
Does it build up? Yep.
And so I told them that, and they said, well, we won't be talking at all then. But if you try to remember those things, it's amazing how it does serve as a guide.
Yeah, and I think that's true even for us, as we think about how we parent and how we communicate with our kids too, right? Just because we need to discipline, just because we need to teach, doesn't mean we still shouldn't be doing that in ways that are kind, in ways that are truly going to build this person up in some way to help learn something, right? Building up doesn't have to mean that I'm complimenting you. It might mean I'm telling you something you need to hear and know, right? But doing so with gentleness and humility and in love, as opposed to out of anger because you frustrated me that you didn't do what I wanted you to do, right? I think we have to think about that all the time in communication. I can become frustrated with someone else, and maybe I need to communicate something with them, but what needs to come across is not I'm angry with you because you made a mistake, but rather we need to work together and figure out the right best next step together, so that we can continue to love each other in the way that we already do, right? Again, the early church, like any family, had conflict as well. At times we hear leaders like Paul address these issues head on, even offering solutions. But often we hear Paul focus on how the church is communicating with one another and processing through their conflict. There can be just as much sin and disunity in how we communicate about our disagreements as there is in the disagreements themselves. I think I didn't write that phrase. That's from Hannah Hayden actually wrote this study. And maybe she pulled it from somewhere else, but I think that's a key point. There can be just as much sin and disunity in how we communicate about our disagreements as there is in the disagreements themselves. Okay, we're going to read one more scripture, Matthew 18. You guys know this one too. Matthew 18, 15 to 17. In this passage, Jesus is specifically teaching on how to handle conflict within the church. But there are some guiding principles here that we can take into our personal conflicts and relationships as well. So, Matthew 18, 15 to 17. Yes, if somebody would read that, Matthew 18, 15 to 17.
If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Okay. So this is different, right, than conflict within families, right? This is referring to the church, but how do you think this teaching could be applied to conflict in our personal families and lives? Maybe within our households, how could it be applied? How could it be applied in our relationships, even with people in our adult lives as well? Any thoughts? What came to my mind, I'm sorry I'm talking more today. What came to my mind was like an intervention if somebody's having an addiction or something.
Yeah.
That, you say, this is a problem. I see how this is affecting your life. I wish you would try to make this change. And they don't see it. Well, then in the intervention, you bring several people in.
Yeah.
And they all speak to this problem.
Yeah.
And hopefully the person's convinced and willing to try.
Yeah. So again, I think stress first, right? When there's a problem, going directly to that person to talk to them about the problem you have with them is always a good rule. I think that's true in our families, right? That's true everywhere we go, that just dealing with it first, sort of with just a small number of people, you and them, if the conflict between you, right? For our kids, it's best if when Becca and Eli are fighting, if they can learn to just work that out themselves without mom or dad needing to step in any way possible, right? That would be my goal for them. And I think modeling that by when I have an issue with somebody, I need to go and talk just to that person. I don't need to wrap the whole rest of the family in or anything else, right? Go and talk to them about it. I think that would be ideal. I would love that. That doesn't happen very often, right? But then whenever there is something that this is not working, this is not being resolved, then we do have to bring in some other authority figures, maybe bring in, some family first and intervention within a family. I think within a family unit, I think, go and talk to mom and dad. But maybe not in a, I got to tell on somebody else type way, but instead in a, hey, usually it ends up just being, I'm beating my brother or I'm beating my sister, right? So mom has to intervene. But in an ideal world, right, let's talk through this, right? Let's figure out what the conflict here and try to work through and resolve it so that this doesn't happen again. Again, this is a different context, but any other thoughts about how this might be able to be applied to a family or to personal relations that aren't necessarily in the church? Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to the Ephesians verse, and the piece of that I know I struggle with the most is the patience.
Yeah.
Having the patience to let the process that's described in Matthew resolve the issue. I want it resolved, and I want it resolved now, usually the way I want it resolved. And
right.
I don't have the patience to let this, discussion go on for some period of time to get to resolution.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's good from a parent's perspective. Sometimes when kids are fighting, and maybe they're not actually getting violent yet, they're just yelling at each other, right? As a parent, I just want to yell at them to get them to stop yelling, right? But that only escalates the problem sometimes, right? It might get them to stop yelling, but it didn't model good conflict resolution, right? No, I don't want them to be yelling at each other, and maybe it can be good afterwards to, remind them that they need to keep their voices down, or if there's some imminent reason they need to actually keep their voices down for the sake of someone else. But if it's just that I'm annoyed with that yelling, that might be part of the process, and they might be better to just continue to work on that themselves. Now, that won't always work. Sometimes it'll just continue to escalate because even the yelling is probably going a step too far, right? But it is a reminder that I don't have to step in to every situation. And if and when I do, if that reaction is just because I'm frustrated with the yelling and then I add to that, right, that's probably not going to help things very much. Yeah, somebody else speak wisdom into what I'm saying.
I don't usually do this very well, but something I've heard and I try is when your kids are having conflict, be a sportscaster, not a referee.
Yeah, that's probably a good analogy.
What's the problem? Having them talk through it and saying, oh, so I think what's happening is this, instead of trying to get in the middle and resolve it. You're just helping them resolve it.
Yeah, sportscaster, not referee. Or certainly, you don't want to get in the game, right? You don't want to get in the middle of being on one side or the other. But I kind of like that, just help them process in some way what's happening here, rather than you being frustrated yourself, which is the hardest thing in the world to do. But I'm glad that somebody else said that instead of me, because I'm certainly not very good at that always. Okay, I want to get through this. We only got about 10 minutes left, so I want to keep moving. Scripture does not deny that in this world we will have conflict, but there are Christian ways to approach conflict. One of the main guiding principles in this passage and other scripture passages is that the main goal of our conflict with others should be to win them over to a Christian way of living, right? For our kids, it's to teach them, it's to model Christian behavior even in the midst of conflict, which again is very hard, but some of these tips I think are good. The goal of Christian conflict is not to prove that we are right and others are wrong, but to point others to Christ and show how he has called us to live. So, I don't have a whiteboard here. I'm not going to take the time to do it this way, but there's two kind of camps here. There's two types of arguing. There would be arguing, you can envision it being up on a whiteboard, right? There's arguing to win and arguing to point others to Christ. Arguing to win and arguing to point others to Christ. If you still have a piece of paper somewhere and want to jot down some notes, what does it look like when someone is arguing to win? And what does it look like when someone is arguing to point others to Christ? So, for example, so that I can kind of get your mind thinking, arguing to win might mean willing to intentionally offend or hurt others, say anything in order to make my point. But arguing to point to Christ is focusing on the issues that are actually at hand, not on unrelated offenses, right? So I'm not going to just slander my neighbor for the sake of winning. This is, by the way, not represented right now well in our current political system. It's probably never been represented well in our political system, but it's on full bad display arguing to win in our political system right now. I don't care what side of the aisle you see yourself on, it is not being displayed well by our leaders in this country. Yeah.
That's exactly it. Arguing to win is focused on the other person, and arguing to win others for Christ is more often focused on whatever the underlying issue is. So it gets personal when you're trying to win, and it's more impersonal when you're trying to
So winning is about, just winning, and pointing others to Christ is focused on the actual issues, and not focused on, just cutting down the other person. Any other additional thoughts for what that might look like, or other ways to describe it? There's a lot of ways I think we could think about this. Anybody have any other thoughts?
Arguing to win means you're not listening.
You're not, that's right, not listening to what the other one's saying. You're thinking instead about what I'm going to say next so that I can win, as opposed to actually hearing what the other person is saying. And when you're arguing to point others to Christ, Christ listens, right? And we do listen and care what the other person says. So that's a great one. Any more? Any other thoughts? Somebody? Oh, sorry. Yeah, Ken?
I was reading the other day in Psalm, David said, "Praise God, don't discipline me in your anger." We usually discipline because we're angry, But Paul said, "Please don't discipline." David said, "Don't discipline me in your anger."
Yeah.
No more.
So arguing to win might be getting angry, right?
God to discipline him out of love because you love me.
Yeah.
Don't hurt me because you're angry at me, but discipline me because you love me.
Yeah.
I want to know if you love me before you discipline.
And I think that becomes a difference in a desired outcome, right? If you're arguing to win, your desired outcome is that I'm right and you're wrong, right? If you're arguing to point others to Christ, the desired outcome is that they would know and see Jesus more clearly, right? Not that you win, right? And that's just a different outcome from the beginning that sort of is your aim and goal. So good. Any other thoughts on that, on those two types of ideas? Arguing to win might be sharing an argument with others in order to get people on your side, right? You might share that argument, but if you're arguing, if you're arguing to gain someone for Christ, you're going to speak to that person first, right? You're not going to share that. You might only share it if it's someone who can truly give you some wisdom on the situation, not just because you want to get them to your side. That makes sense? Arguing to win might be using a tone or volume that's unnecessary or disrespectful. I've done that way too many times, right? Maybe the words I've said to my kids have actually been okay words to try to be commentating on the game instead of getting in it, but I've said it in an angry and frustrated tone that they don't hear the words I said, they just hear Dad's mad at me, right? This gets, only arguing to point others to Christ would look like only sharing an argument with others if they can provide wise biblical guidance or can pray in confidence for you. And Hannah has on here, and I love it, she says, never on social media, right? You're not going to gain wisdom for for the sake of winning someone else to Christ in an argument you're having by posting this online in any capacity. That's not where you're going to gain true Christian biblical wisdom. Because then you're really just sharing, whether you realize it or not, if you're sharing it online and it's an argumentative, place of contention and conflict in your life, you're probably, maybe without even realizing, you're probably posting it online to gain support, to feel good about your position. You're not actually doing it to gain true Christian sort of support. You're just getting more people on your side to agree with you. But as many people as you find online who might agree with you, you'll probably also find as many people online who disagree with you, and it's not going to be helpful. We can't control how the people who we are in conflict with approach arguments. So you can't convince someone else, right? If you're going about this like, ooh, now I need to tell the people that I'm in conflict with how they really need to be arguing to win others to Christ instead of arguing to win. Like, no. This is about you, right? You can't control how they're going to approach the conflict. You can only approach and work on how you are addressing this conflict. We can control how we argue and have conflict with others. It's not easy, but Christ has not called us to easy. Let's look up real quick Romans 12, verse 2. Romans 12, 2. And I promise this is the last scripture since we've got 4 minutes left. But Romans 12, 2, if somebody can read that.
Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect.
Yeah, be transformed by the renewal of your minds. Be transformed by Christ, right? Don't conform to the nature of this world. And I think this is where, like I said, many of our current leaders, especially in the political world, although I think some of our leaders probably in our workplaces and other people that you might see in leadership positions in our world, we don't display this well, right? We don't actually live this out well. Even if they're Christian people, that doesn't mean that they're carrying this out well. You know that you're a Christian and you've not always lived this out well, right? People argue to win, right? This is America, and if I want something, I got to do it myself, and I'm the best person to do it, and I need to figure this out on my own. And if that means I got to trample everybody else around me, then so be it, because that's just the way the world works. That's just the hard knocks of life. That's sort of what gets modeled, right? You got to do it all, and you got to be right, and you don't want to ever show any weakness. You don't want to ever show that somebody else might be right. That's what gets modeled and displayed, and it's what's modeled and displayed online in the political world, and probably too often in our own lives as well. Christ says, do not conform. Paul says, do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your minds. In the midst of conflicts and arguments, it's so easy to fall into the I am here to win mindset, which is why it's crucial for Christians to intentionally take time to think about how we address conflict even before it happens, right? If we were in the midst of conflict right now, this conversation wouldn't be very effective. But since we're not in the middle of talking about some great conflict, either in the church or among us or with our families right now is the good time to think about how do we address conflict before it actually comes up. Christ never intended the world to experience such conflict, but he does allow us to be a witness even in the midst of conflict. That's something I've been thinking about lately too. How can I be a witness in this situation, right? How can I be a witness in this situation? How do my actions witness to who I am as a child of God? And the more we can think about that in everything we do, what is this witnessing? What is this saying about me? The better we're going to be. Often through how we handle conflict, we need to be good witnesses. So I do have one more handout, and this is just really meant to be a take-home handout. And it is written with very much family language in mind. Joe, can you help pass some of those out? I'm going to send somebody over here. Amanda, can you help pass some of those out for me? Thank you. And I'm going to start to walk through it. This is probably going to be most helpful for those families, again, with children in the home. But I think there's things you can gain from it in dealing with conflict in general. Questions on here like, am I being respectful in how I'm dealing with conflict? When you're thinking about consequences for children, is the consequence related And is it reasonable? I'm sometimes good on the related consequences. I'm not always so good on the reasonable consequences. I'm like, you're fighting with your brother, go to your room all night, right? Well, like, I don't actually enforce that, but like, I'll say things like that, but then I don't actually make them do, and it like scares my kids, and it's not good, right? Maybe for those of you who don't have kids at home, the conflict with extended family over on the right-hand side, I might draw your attention more specifically to that. It says there are few things quite as emotionally draining as being in conflict with our extended family, and yet it happens to everyone. Here are some questions to consider when you find yourself in family conflict, or I would say almost in any kind of conflict with other adults. So again, especially for those who don't have kids, I'm giving this out to you still because of the right-hand side of this. Have I prayed about this conflict? Woo. How quick are we to just act or react or be in conflict instead of actually praying specifically about this conflict? Have I clearly communicated my intentions and fairly listened to the intentions of others? Am I speaking about this family member in a respectful way? Oh, this one, we have to be better at in our house. Am I speaking about this family member in a respectful way, even if I disagree with them? Your kids and the people around you hear how you speak about other people. Maybe if they're not even a family member. I speak about this brother or sister in Christ at church. In the way that I speak about them, would I be proud of that? Would I be happy for other people to be listening in to what I'm saying about them? Do I need to set reasonable boundaries to limit conflict in this relationship? Again, kind of goes back to clear expectations of what I expect and what's happening. And would I be proud of my children if my children handled conflict in the same way I am choosing to do so? Ooh, that's a hard one. Would I be proud of my children if they were handling things the way I am? So just questions to ponder. That's a take-home resource for you to look through and maybe pray through as a couple or with your family or whoever's in your life. Gail, one more question.
About 3 years ago, I don't remember where it was, but we went to that reconciliation
Yeah.
conference. It was excellent. If they ever do that again,
Yes.
you can find so many ways to utilize.
Yes, Ambassadors of Reconciliation does a very good job of communicating these types of things. Yeah, Bruce, question, comment?
I have a couple of quick announcements as you end.
Sure, yeah, I mean, right now then would be the time for that, yeah.
Okay. First of all, we are going to repaint the Dixon preschool room on July 26th and 27th, which is a Friday and Saturday. We'll need about 8 to 10 people, volunteers, to help us with that. I'm going to put a sign-up sheet over here in the narthex area. Secondly, Pastor Jason Taylor, our call candidate for our senior pastor, is going to be visiting next weekend. You may see him around the church campus, either in Springfield or down here in Dixon. If you see him, he's a good call guy, and I think you'll recognize him. Please introduce yourself to him. We'll welcome him to our campus. Thank you.
Very good. So if you didn't catch that, they're going to be painting the preschool classrooms. What's the dates on that again, Bruce? The painting classroom? July 26th and 27th. Last weekend in July, Friday, Saturday, and they're needing volunteers to help come paint. We would love for anybody here, and I forgot to announce it at 8 a.m., but I will next week for sure too. I had seen the email, but so love to have volunteers to come help make that happen. You're dismissed. Go in peace. Welcome, Pastor Taylor, next week. Very good. Tim's looking at me like, can I go? Oh, I think I need to stop this.